You cannot claim to be the United Nations while disregarding the voice of 54 nations. It is not possible.
Before we dive in, I want you to watch this video from beginning to the end. With my African analysis, we'll break down every inch of President Ruto's powerful UN speech. And trust me, you don't want to miss a single part of it. For 80 years, the United Nations has claimed to represent the whole world. But how can it be truly united while sidelining the voices of 54 African nations? Kenya's President William Ruto put it bluntly. You cannot claim to be the United Nations while disregarding the voice of 54 nations. Today, Africa's message is clear. The silence is over. For more than 2 decades, Africa has spoken with one voice. The Ezulwini Consensus, adopted by African leaders in 2005, demanded fairness, justice, and permanent representation for Africa at the world's highest decision-making table. Yet, the call has been consistently ignored. President William Ruto, speaking at the United Nations, expressed what millions of Africans feel. Africa is no longer willing to wait on the margins of global governance while decisions on peace, security, and development are made without our voices. This is not just about recognition. It's about justice. The truth is simple. You cannot call it the United Nations if Africa, one of the largest, most resourceful, and most youthful continents, has no permanent seat at the Security Council. Consider this. Africa contributes the largest share of peacekeepers to UN missions worldwide. African soldiers put their lives on the line for global peace. African states host millions of refugees from wars they did not start. African communities bear the brunt of climate change, droughts, floods, desertification, though they contribute the least to global emissions. And yet, Africa has no permanent voice when the Security Council makes binding decisions that directly affect African nations. Ruto challenged this imbalance, stating, "Reforming the Security Council is not a favor. It is a necessity for the United Nations' own survival."
How can Africa carry the weight of peacekeeping, climate suffering, and economic sacrifice, but be locked out of the very room where decisions are made? That is hypocrisy.
The imbalance is not only political, it is also financial. Take the International Monetary Fund. In its most recent allocation of special drawing rights, wealthy nations, already strong, already secure, walked away with 64% of the resources. Poorer nations, including many across Africa, received only 2.4%. President Ruto did not mince words. He exposed this global double standard, saying Africa cannot continue to be treated as an afterthought in financial systems that claim to be global. This injustice has forced Africa to design its own solutions. An African central bank to issue a single currency, an African monetary fund to stabilize economies, an African investment bank to finance development, an African credit rating agency to tell Africa's story truthfully, without the bias of foreign institutions. Ruto's vision is clear. Africa will no longer wait for handouts or accept being sidelined.
The IMF gave 64% of resources to the rich and only 2.4% to the poor. That is daylight robbery. Plain and simple.
The demand is not radical. It is reasonable. Africa insists on at least 2 permanent seats with full veto power and more non-permanent seats in the Security Council. Ruto reminded the world that this is not charity, not a favor, but a matter of survival for the UN itself. Because history is unforgiving. The League of Nations collapsed because it could not adapt, could not include, could not evolve. The UN risks the same fate if it clings to a 1945 mindset in a 21st century world.
If the UN refuses to reform, it will collapse just like the League of Nations. That is not a warning. That is history.
Still, it would be unfair to deny what the UN has achieved. For 8 decades, it has helped prevent world wars. It has coordinated humanitarian relief, supported refugees, fought against pandemics, advanced women's rights, and created frameworks for climate action. But without reform, even these achievements will lose legitimacy. Because how long can an institution claim to represent the world while excluding an entire continent of 1.4 billion people? On climate, Africa is not just a victim, it is a leader. Kenya today generates more than 90% of its electricity from renewable sources: wind, solar, geothermal, and hydro. Across the continent, nations are investing in green energy, turning crisis into opportunity. President Ruto highlighted this reality. Africa is not waiting to be rescued. Africa is innovating, leading, and driving the solutions.
Africa is not begging for solutions. Africa is creating solutions for itself and for the world.
And yet, without fair financing, these solutions are slowed. Climate action requires investment. Infrastructure requires funding. Innovation requires resources. That is why Africa's call for reform is not about prestige. It is about survival. It is about justice. It is about building a fair and stable global order for everyone. At the 80th anniversary of the United Nations, Ruto's message was loud and clear. You cannot claim to be the United Nations while disregarding the voice of 54 nations. It is not possible.
This is Africa's moment, not tomorrow, not in another 20 years. Now, the UN cannot survive without Africa. That is the truth. Ruto spoke for all of us. Africa will no longer be silent.
This is Africa's moment. The world must hear our voice. If you agree that Africa deserves its rightful place at the global table, don't just watch, take action. Share this video so the message spreads. Leave a comment and let your voice be counted. Hit the like button so more people see this story. And most importantly, subscribe to African Focus Reports, because here, Africa's voice is never silenced, never ignored, and always amplified. Together, we can make sure the world never forgets. Africa will not be silent.